Anthony Mayfield, che invito a salire nel frattempo, ci parlerà dello stato dei social software.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I usually speak very, very fast, and I've been told I need to slow down. So if I start speeding up, which I tend to when I get excited, just stand up and go and slow down, and I'll do that. Okay. I work for iCrossing, which is a digital online marketing firm, big in America, big in the UK, not big anywhere else. But my background is actually about 11, 12 years in corporate communications, in public relations. So I left a large PR group in the UK called Bell Pottinger to work for a search agency, which a lot of my PR colleagues thought was very strange. Why are you going off to work with geeks in search engine land? And basically, it was because I'd seen the effect of social media changing the way that media worked. And corporate communications is primarily obsessed with communicating via the media. So I thought, well, this is going to change everything. This is a revolution, and in order to think it through and come up with the appropriate strategies, I need to understand more about it and understand more about how to use the technology. So first of all, I appreciate that I'm at a Web 2.0 conference and I'm wearing a tie. That is on purpose. I am the odd one out, like this English cartoon of the man who was the odd one out wearing the wrong thing. I'm wearing a tie because I want to persuade you that I'm not a football hooligan, even though I have extremely short hair. Marco pointed out to me very helpfully, as I was getting a bit nervous before coming on stage, "You look like hooligan." And I said, well, yes, I did go last night to get a haircut in Udine, because I'd forgotten to get one before I came out here. And I said to the woman in the hairdressers around the corner from the hotel, "Can I have a zero, please?" Just kind of, she looked at me really strangely. I don't think many Italian men go in and ask for a zero. I showed her my driving license to persuade her that is actually how I have my hair. She had to phone her boss to check it was all right. But in the end, we got there. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about what living through a revolution really means. And we see revolution, we tend to think of it in our kind of our human ground level perspective as something that happens overnight. And marketers especially, and businesses especially think the revolution, the web revolution, it just happened. Okay, so now how do we communicate in this new space? What's the rule book? Well, actually, revolutions, if we turn to the past, if we turn to history, turn to historians, revolutions are actually things where the effects become more and more pronounced over time. And when we look at the web revolution, Ewan mentioned it earlier, many others have mentioned it as well. When we look at the web revolution and the social media revolution, which is kind of the latest expression, the furthest expression of that, we're looking at something that changes everything and will continue to change everything through our lives. I was encouraged. One of the books that I draw a lot of inspiration from is by an English historian, or it might be an American, called Elizabeth Eisenstein, about the print revolution in early modern Europe. And she even says that there was kind of a Silicon Valley around Venice back in the 1400s. There was a huge explosion of print shops throughout Italy, mainly because people wanted to get their name on the map. It was a bit like those corporate websites that went up because we've got to have one. And then as soon as the town had printed its first book and they had their name on a book, they couldn't think of any other reasons to support the cost of the printing press, and it disappeared. And so there was a bubble around that time, which I find interesting. And it's interesting to be speaking here not far from where all of that happened. So the last great media revolution, print, yes indeed. These gentlemen who spent 3 months of every year of their lives copying out books were kind of put out of a job over a few years by these gentlemen who started up print shops. And I think it's interesting to think that what happened in the print revolution wasn't just that suddenly books were produced in larger quantities and people like Martin Luther got to spread his ideas incredibly quickly across Europe and all of those things that we typically learn about in our history lessons, it changed everything. It changed the way we think. Things like alphabetization, things like cross-indexing, things like the job of the man who's down in the bottom right-hand corner of this picture is a sub-editor. The idea of getting rid of errors. As books were printed and reprinted in the print revolution, they got more accurate, not less, whereas in the age of copying, they got less and less accurate. But they make us think in different ways. They actually create new mental models. We see people sharing data, like anatomy and like maps. A professor in Verona and a professor in Frankfurt could look at the same map or the same anatomy and actually have a conversation about that, rather than discussing two kind of copies with the errors that were in there. This is a revolution that wasn't just about the written word, it was a revolution about mental models, about data. And we're kind of living through the same thing now. We saw in England, the Civil War, probably the first Civil War that was, actually, I don't know if that's true at all, but so the first Civil War in England that was caused by the print revolution is lots and lots of people, geographically dispersed, started to form communities of interest around things like religion and politics and ideas around commerce. But I want to talk to you a bit about the current revolution that we're living through and what that means for people like me and people like my clients in marketing. And there's a lovely story, which I know some of you will know already, that stands for me as an allegory for what's happening to marketing on the web. Marketing, as we all know, if we've read Seth Godin or any of those books, is changing away from an industry that was dominated by mass advertising, by mass media, by buying attention, by blitzing people until they listen to your message. Back a couple of years ago, or it may just have been last year, I'm sketchy on the facts today, but that doesn't really matter, I'm telling stories. About last year in Sao Paulo in Brazil, the local council was having problems with advertisers. They were putting hoardings on the top of buildings, in the street, everywhere. The whole place was blitzed out by advertising billboards. And they thought that they needed to do something about this. And as ever, I'm sure the advertising industry said, we'll self-regulate. Don't worry, you don't need laws. We'll look after ourselves. Of course, they didn't, and it just got worse and worse and worse until Sao Paulo took a very brave decision and decided to take down all of the advertising. And they stripped the city bare. There were no more advertising hoardings. They were either gone or there were no adverts on them at all. And for me, that stands as a strong allegory for what's happening online, and why we need to rethink business communications and rethink advertising, beautiful as some adverts like the one from Cisco are. I think it's because online people are already taking down the billboards, they continue to take down the billboards, and they will not let your billboards go up in their personal space because they control it. There's my slide saying what I just said. Well done, me. So anyway, it's Web 2.0 conference. Large numbers are mandatory. We all know 1.25 billion people online. We probably all know there's about 400 million, roughly a third or so, math's not my strong point, of those are involved in social networks at the moment, according to MySpace. A biased source, I'll admit. But one of the most interesting things about this revolution, and the biggest number that stands out for me, was one that was created by IDC, was put forward by IDC, an analyst firm working with EMC. And they said that by 2010, which I still can't quite believe is only 2 years away, by 2010, 70% of content that's created online, of new content in the world, will be created by individuals rather than organizations. And that will be the first time that the majority of content is not created by universities and people working for newspapers. It will be created by individuals. And that means that the network will be dominated by individuals for the first time. You see, I think one of the problems that we have getting our heads around all of this is that we tend to think of the web in abstract, apart from people who think about it in networks, which I know a lot of people do here. But a lot of people just think about the web as a cloud. This is a very typical diagram. Most of you will have seen something like this. People think of the web as their web, their information network at work, box attached to person, attached to a cloud in the corner. That's it, the web, it's a cloud. It's kind of a thing, it's out there. I don't really know what it is. But of course, it's not a cloud, it's not an abstract concept. It's a very, very real, tangible space. It may be an intractably complex network that we can never properly understand, but it is a real place. It's not something that just happens out there. It's not just like God moving in mysterious ways. But the other mistake that businesses make, because their mental models, which are just changing, like those mental models changed through the print revolution make, is that they still try to force ideas onto the web that are to do with channels, to do with the age of media which was built around people owning infrastructure to create and then distribute content. And as we all know, that world's disappeared now. The reason I joined a search firm and the reason I got excited about search engine marketing was not for the fact that there were a lot of people doing clever spamming. It was for the heart of what Google does and the heart of what search engines do, is that they try to see the web as it really is. They're not looking for websites within the web that look the best. They're looking for the websites that actually are the best, and they define that by human reputation. This is a diagram built with a network tool, and on the right you can see kind of a very scattered network. It's a network around the subject of a Dell laptop catching fire in Japan, and that big blob in the center is a website called Boing Boing, which I'm sure we all know, which was one of the first to, oh no, sorry, not Boing Boing, Gizmodo, which was one of the first. I'm sure Boing Boing got in on the act fairly quickly, but Gizmodo was the first to carry those pictures, and as a result it acquired lots of links on that topic from the BBC and from Dig and from Boing Boing and lots of other blogs, and it became the most useful, the site with the best human reputation on that subject. And over on the left-hand side is a much more regularly shaped cloud. Lots of the nodes are the same sort of size, and that's spam. That's websites trying to look like they've got a good reputation on the subject of Dell so they can sell traffic back to them. So it was that realization that actually search engines and that idea of trying to get your head around the web as a tangible place, as a network, and trying to understand networks in marketing and understand it in the media, that drove us to start looking at redefining how marketing and how businesses communicate works. The web, of course, is an open network. The other way that I think an article in Wired early last year described Google that got me excited as a way of trying to see the web through the eyes of a search engine, not technically, but just conceptually, was that Clive Thompson in Wired magazine said that Google is not a search engine, Google's a reputation management engine. If you stop trying to kid it, if you stop trying to fool it, then you'll see what its long-term mission, and the long-term mission of all search engines is to actually discover that human reputation and try to express that. People always think of search engine optimization and therefore brands and websites online as being about talking to a machine. Journalists, who talk to a lot, often get upset about the idea of changing the way that their articles are structured so that they're better found in search engines, even though they've been changing the structure of their articles for many, many years so they get found better in newspapers and they fit that format. But if we just understand that mission to try and find the most useful things on the web, it starts us to think differently about networks. The thing about network effects, and it's interesting following on from Ross Mayfield, who I've no relation, who I've learned so much from reading his blog over the years. He's actually explained to us a lot of the ideas about networks. But the thing that I discovered when I started reading about networks and reading some maths books and reading some complexity theory books is how recent the study of networks is and how little we really understand about things like network effects. One of the most wonderful moments last year for me was a conference called Reboot in Denmark, where I heard a professor of sociology from Stockholm talking about magical humanism, this idea that when we try and deploy a network effect or a synergy within an organization, on the web and in marketing, we don't really know what's going to happen. That's what we mean. When we say emergence, that's our consultancy word and our technical word for we don't really know what's going to happen, but we have faith that something good is going to happen because we understand that. So that's quite interesting, and that leads back to what we were talking about you've got to give up control and you've got to feel comfortable about control because you can't define what a network effect's going to be. That's a really hard lesson for marketers. Marketers think on an industrial model of advertising. They think of buying eyeballs through display adverts. They think of farming attention, really buying attention. And what we realize, of course, is that in a network and how networks work, attention can't be bought. You can't pay a lot to be the most prominent node in a network because the search engines keep getting better and people always smell it. People always smell the bullshit and they go round it. So attention can't be bought. I don't think that says an end to advertising. But I think that advertisers need to stop thinking about it is a machine you put money in and 1,000 eyeballs pop out. They've got to start thinking about it. I buy 1,000 opportunities to be useful within the network. I buy 1,000 opportunities to attract attention. And when I get that opportunity, I need to earn it. Simply because of the scale of the content. It's just this superabundance of content. We all know the figures. I won't dwell on them, but we need to compete within that. And really, it's great. It's been great for me hearing so much talk about complexity and network theory, because that's what I bang on about all the time to my clients and at work. But really, the defining feature of how businesses communicate is that complexity and uncertainty has replaced stability. It used to be, when I started in corporate communications 10 years ago, that there were 14 national newspapers and 4 TV stations and a clutch of radio stations. And if I got attention in one of those through affecting editorial or by buying advertising space, I could hit demographics. I could hit people. So aggressive, so doing things to people. So it gets us round to thinking, okay, that's all well and good, and we accept, Anthony, that there is a media revolution going on and we need to change the way that we market. What are the rules? What's the textbook? Well, of course, there is no textbook, and there won't be one for several years until we get together and write it. But we kind of, to start thinking about what that textbook looks like, we need to think outside of the rules of marketing that have all been built on this channel view of the world and start thinking about what communicating as a business means in a network. And it comes down to, as ever, some simple things. It comes down to some simple questions. We need to start asking, what does success look like in a network? I get asked a lot, speak at a lot of client conferences, and I get asked questions a lot by clients that say things like, how can we harness social networks? How can we dominate this network? How can we own this network? This is the language that they're used to using. And you can't do any of those things in a network, but you can be successful. Successful looks like being prominent. How do you get to be prominent? Well, you have to understand where your networks are. Precious few people do in large organizations at the moment. They don't even understand where they're being talked about, never mind where their subject's being talked about. And I think that really comes down to how can we attract attention from our networks, how can we earn it, as I say. And that all comes down to being useful, whether that's being useful by being entertaining, or whether that's useful by adding to people's knowledge, or whether that's being useful by adding to networks and the value of networks in any way. So where do we find this inspiration for new marketing and communications models? Well, I'm just going to share some thoughts, and I'd be really happy to hear your thoughts back, obviously, because I'm searching for the answers myself. But some of the places that we've looked start with the media, which is, of course, having to change much more quickly than most, because its advertising revenue models and its business models are disappearing, and they stand to be out of a job fairly soon unless they come up with the answer. Well, this is a photo that I took at the Daily Telegraph in England. It's one of our largest national newspapers, and it doesn't look like a newsroom to me. It looks like a trading floor. It looks like I worked in newsrooms, I started out in newspapers. They really didn't look like this. It didn't look that nice. It looks like a trading floor, and it looks like a trading floor on purpose. Up there in the, on the wall, you can see a bunch of screens, and one of those screens is showing attention data to the journalists as they work through the day, as they fight for attention in their live attention markets, as it were, showing them which are the most popular stories on the newspaper that hour, that week, that day, on politics, on business, on travel, on whatever. It's reminding them that even within their own pages, that they're competing for attention. I find that very, very interesting. I find that idea of markets as being quite inspirational, because even though we're in marketing, we don't tend to think about live markets. We don't tend to think in the way that financial markets do, in terms of taking positions, in terms of taking up opportunities, in terms of moving very, very quickly. But of course, the Telegraph is a newspaper that, because it's blessed by being in the English language, is earning a huge amount of attention from markets that it didn't previously exploit. 70% of its traffic now comes from the US. A lot of it via search engines, a lot of it from things like the Drudge Report. But it's always competing. Its field of competition for that attention is not guaranteed. It's now competing with things like Xinhua News Agency in China, as well as the New York Times, as well as a million other blogs. I think one of the other places that we've started to draw success, to draw good lessons from about what that marketing rule book of the future might look like, is from success stories. There's a lot of people talk about blogs, talk about complex adaptive systems, about networks as being a bit like ecosystems. And that's a really good analogy. And evolution within ecosystems is a really good analogy to look at. Okay, so what's evolving, what's winning in these spaces, and why is it winning? And again, it was Reboot where I got most of my inspiration for the year. I saw a presentation from the guy, Ted Reingold, who runs a social network called Dogster. Does anyone know Dogster? No, Dogster is MySpace for dogs. Yeah. It's profitable. It's been going 4 years. It's successful. It draws in a lot of attention, more than a lot of pet magazines. In that attention market, it's winning, as is its sister site. Can you guess what it's called? Yes, Catster. And it's got many, many members, and it's very, very profitable. But one of the success stories, and one of the reasons for its success that Ted talked about, apart from all the things that you'd be used to from hearing about web startups like fast failure, like listening really closely, like iterative design and all of those kind of things, one of the things that I heard from Ted was this idea of an impact horizon. So when Ted started out developing this network, he started rolling out new features for his users and new content for his users as quickly as he could. As soon as he spotted the need, he got it out the door. And his development projects would take about 1 to 2 months. As he became more successful over time, he started to act a bit more like traditional media. He started getting on more ambitious products, big video galleries, lots of things that would take a lot of time, a lot of money. And most of these failed. And he tried to work out why these failed, and he realized the one thing that they all had in common, apart from the cost, was the time that they took. Anything that was over 6 months in the making took much, much, much more, it was much more likely to fail. And he called that the impact horizon. Straight away what he did was pull that development time back down to 2 months. He realized that the needs of the network, the attention in the network, had moved on so much in 6 months that it was very, very unlikely that he was meeting the needs of the community. And that made me think back and take that lesson back to marketing campaigns. When you see even a campaign as beautiful as Cisco's, it's planned out 6 months, a year in advance. Media plans start being put down. It's an industrial process. It's for stuff in the future because they're all designed around buying attention, doing things to people, channel media approaches. It makes me think, how can we take those lessons of being able to react that quickly to opportunities within the network back into marketing campaigns? And I take faith from another place. I take faith from automotive manufacturing. Very, very interesting to see Toyota, now the joint #1 car company in the world, and its ideas around lean manufacturing, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. That idea of having your supply chain so finely tuned and so on your side that you can build 2 or 3 cars and different models on the production line in a different day, that you can adapt your whole organization to manufacture differently in different countries. And I use it as an analogy to take back to my clients and colleagues in marketing and say, well, if building cars can be that fast and that adaptive to market conditions, then so can marketing and marketing campaigns. We just need to start engineering them differently, building them differently. I don't usually have to say, cheers, Ross, but thanks, Ross. I do like to talk about the power law of participation that Ross uses a lot, because it's another place that I start to take inspiration. When you look at a network, when you look at those nodes, and you imagine your company's communications, your company's website, in that massive cloud of different websites, you realize that it's got the same chances as a blog by an individual of being successful. Obviously, there's potentially a lot more resource behind it. So actually, brands and organizations in networks are just like people. They follow that same participation curve. And it's quite a comforting message when you start to think about that, because even if you are the largest, most complex organization in the world, you can begin by listening. You can begin by reading. And I say listening, not monitoring, because listening is very human. If you listen, people notice. If you're monitoring, you're a guard on a tower in the corner of a prison. And that brands can learn that just like people, they can go through that process of developing how engaged they are in social networks. They don't need to dive in. They don't need to jump in with a blog or their own social network or a forum. I think that one of the big lessons, and I'm not talking about what we do so much today, but one of the lessons that we've drawn out of that and we've started to put into our rule book, our playbook, are around that much more important than deciding which format to be in, like whether you should be blogging or doing podcasts or all of the rest of it, is putting the foundations in place so that you can move incredibly quickly whenever you want to in the way that you communicate. And you think that organizations are able to do that through their PR departments, but they're not. Very often websites are locked down. People can't even put up a press release without notifying IBM a few months in advance. And we can boil it down to three things that companies need to get in place, much, much more than creative ideas. You know, the marketing industry of today that's built up from yesteryear is still very much one where creative and TV advertising rules. But it's much more important to get in platforms, websites that can be very, very adaptable. Processes that mean that different departments are talking to each other, that the conversations with legal have already been had, that the conversations with compliance departments have been had already, so that people can move quickly. And most important of all, and most of the success stories, including ones like Dell that we've all heard about before, are built on approaches that are built on principles, that are built on people throughout the organization, especially at the top, understanding what they believe in, understanding what they believe in about how the appropriate ways are to market in these environments. And just to give you a quick example of what happens when you put all of those three things together, this is a kind of a WordPress blogging platform type thing that we used for news around a car insurer in the UK. It doesn't become much less funky or much less exciting than that. But they created a platform with us around on WordPress. And when the floods hit the UK in the last summer, they wanted to get out very, very quickly with something that was actually useful to people around the subject of what to do if you were had flooding in your house, what to do if you were worried about it. Because the processes and the conversations within the organization had already taken place and everyone had agreed on what was useful and what wasn't, they got a website up within 24 hours that was approved by legal and compliance in a really heavily regulated industry, and they even linked to competitors within that. All things that just wouldn't have happened unless they'd gone through the thinking and put all those bits and bobs in place. It boils down to three principles that we've discovered so far. First of all, that you need to understand your networks, that you need to understand how you can be useful to them, and taking that lesson from Dogster, that you're live in them, that you're there and you're listening and you're able to respond and build things and get content out and start having conversations really, really quickly. And I want to kind of begin to wind up with an example of how we've done that at our company. We rolled out we saw that there was no book out there for marketers that was simple enough to understand about what social media actually was, you know, what a blog was, what a social network was, what Second Life was. So we wrote one, you know, it's 3,000 words, not extremely long, but packed full of links, really simple language, and we put it out there. And it got a good reception. We put it out there with a Creative Commons license, so anyone could download it, anyone could do what they liked with it, as long as they gave us a nod and said thank you, or linked to us, which is great if you're in search. And it worked really well, and we went up to number 2 in Google as a result of all the bloggers and all of the newspapers who were linking to us saying this is interesting. And we've stayed up there for a very, very long time, which we found interesting, and we couldn't quite work out why, because we were still getting more and more links until someone went and did some research. And just this week, I've not told this story before, but it's definitely one of the most thrilling things that's ever happened to me in social media. Just this week, I had a conversation with this lady called Jia Liu, which I'll probably mispronounce, but hey-ho. She found the What is Social Media ebook and said, well, this is useful, and I think I'd quite like to translate it into Chinese. So she put out a call on a social network in China called Yiyan, which is actually a social network built around translations, translating interesting blog posts from Chinese into English and interesting blog posts and material from English into Chinese. And she put out a call for people to help her to translate the ebook. And 2 people answered, one in Guangzhou and one in Beijing. And together they along with you, created this book and published it in China. And it's had 2,000 downloads in China, which is something that I wasn't expecting at all. And off the back of it, they've created a company called InnoBook, which has since October published 25 more books into China, getting up to about 25,000 downloads per copy. And all of that was to do with being useful to our networks on the subject that we wanted to talk about, and it earned us attention, and it earned us attention in the form of links and traffic, which we're rewarded with, not only in the human way, in that we get to make lots of new friends in places like China, but we also pop up the top in Google when you put social media in, which is ace. So media, I'm just going to round up now and pass over to Maeve and her panel, but media and marketing aren't where it ends. As I said, this is a revolution where the effects and the impacts become more and more and more profound over time. And media and marketing, the idea of like owning our own media and taking control of the media networks, isn't where it ends. I think one of the most exciting developments that really sends shivers up my spine is seeing what some of the people who started the Clue Train Manifesto are working on now, and something that bodes well for the next 5 years, 10 years, 100 years. And that's the idea of, well, if you can own your own data, you own your own media, and own your own media space, why can't you own your own data? Why should there be such a thing as CRM? Why can't I own my data and let you see it when I want to? Why can't I let you see that and get some kind of return on that? And as soon as you start thinking like that, well, you see a whole new revolution unfolding around commerce that's going to be as profound as the one around blogs and social media. So I hope some of that has been useful. There's been some useful thoughts in there. I'm conscious I'm speaking to a highly educated audience that knows a lot about all of this already. But yeah, I mean, I'll open up to questions if we've got any time. And if not, I'll just get out of the way and let the next panel get on with it. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Yes, there is a saying that I have found somewhere recently. Customer support is the new marketing. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I can. It's interesting because I have relationships now with clients in some very large companies, not always through one channel. When I was in PR, I always had a relationship with the PR manager or the PR director. Now I can have a relationship with them or with e-commerce or with marketing and have the same conversation, but the next step, especially after you've done initial research, is to start a conversation between all of those departments. And it includes legal and compliance, and it includes customer contact. So one of the projects that we're working on at the moment is with Symantec in America, helping them go out and do proactive customer service in forums so that they don't barge in places where they're not welcome, but when someone's asking a technical question that's answered by their website, that someone just pops in and goes, it's over here if you want it, and puts a link into their website. That's ethical, that's useful, that's sensible, it's customer service. I get this all the time from PR directors as well, is what happens when someone's got a problem and they're discussing it on a blog? Should I be answering that? What's the volume going to be like? Well, I think the answer is that customer care, customer service is absolutely part of marketing, as is product design and innovation. I've seen in the UK, E.ON, the energy company, which I know is across Europe as well, the digital marketing manager there has set up training for all of his call center staff, not so that they have to go and answer things about E.ON in forums, but he just knows that those people are more likely to actually be in forums anyway and to say things. So he just wants to give them training so that they understand. It's not prescriptive, it's just understanding here are some good ways to go about it. And don't forget that you're always in the Google cache, and don't forget that you're in public, things like that. These are sensible things. Absolutely, customer service is very, very important. But another pithy phrase, apart from customer service, is the new marketing, which, well, no, it's not. It is a very much more important part of it, is that the internal communications within companies always used to be the poor relation of public relations, but actually, especially when you've got 20,000 employees, as important, because all of those people are connected into the networks. Any more? No. Okay. Thank you.